Alan Lund Company looks forward to seeing you at Matt's in March.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Probably everyone has heard about the so-called trucker tan, that thing that happens because you have one arm by a window and one that's not. Now, a device to protect your left arm from the sun is finally on the market. Ashley Blackford speaks with former truck driver Scott Catuzza, who says the constant sunburns and cancer risk were the driving force behind creating the arm rocker sun blocker. I'm sure that for some people who went into trucking, as they learned the business, they must have thought no one said there would be math involved. But in fact, there's quite a bit. And one of the big areas for math in trucking is IFTA, the International Fuel Tax Agreement. Do it wrong, and you could end up with an audit. I'll discuss the issue with Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. And finally, the first Trump administration was well known for rolling back regulations. This time around, it looks like Congress wants to get in on the act, with at least two pieces of legislation targeting regulations that affect trucking, both involving emissions, electric trucks, and connected issues. I'll talk with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Mark. Time is ticking to get your comments in on the broker transparency proposal. The deadline is this Thursday, March 20th. This is your chance to let the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration know whether it should move forward with its proposal to strengthen existing broker transparency regulations. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, which petitioned the agency to begin the rulemaking process in 2020, told FMCSA that it must begin holding brokers accountable for evading transparency regulations. To comment, you can visit fightingfortruckers.com. Heavier trucks mean more damage to the nation's bridges. That's according to a new study released by the Coalition Against Bigger Trucks. The coalition talked about the likely impact of proposed legislation to raise truck weights from the current limit of 80,000 pounds to 91,000 pounds. The study found that depending on the proposed heavier truck configurations, between more than 65 to 82,000 local bridges nationwide would be at risk if Congress allows heavier trucks. The price tag to replace those bridges ranges from an estimated $70.5 to $98.5 billion. The coalition says bridges across all 50 states would suffer if any of the congressional proposals become law. Canada's new Prime Minister has been busy since taking office. According to the Canadian Trucking Alliance, one of Prime Minister Mark Carney's first orders of business was announcing the federal government will cancel the carbon tax. CTA says it's been calling on the federal government to scrap the tax for years to give some relief to the trucking industry. It estimates the carbon tax translates into extra fuel costs between $15,000 and $20,000 per year per truck for a long-haul truck operator. Carney announced that the removal of the tax for consumers will be effective April 1st. More than $2.5 million worth of methamphetamine was found recently in a shipment of Persian limes. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reports that officers at the Far International Bridge cargo facility found the drugs in a commercial tractor-trailer entering the country from Mexico. A CBP officer selected the vehicle for inspection, which included utilizing non-intrusive inspection equipment and screening by a drug-sniffing dog. Physical inspection of the truck resulted in officers extracting 960 packages of methamphetamine, weighing approximately 268 pounds, concealed within the shipment. CBP seized the narcotics and vehicle. Homeland Security initiated a criminal investigation. Studies are underway at several universities across the country to see how autonomous vehicles could benefit rural communities. The University of Wisconsin-Madison and Oklahoma State University are the lead schools, sharing a $15 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation. The 6-year project is looking to develop AV solutions to improve mobility, such as enabling non-drivers better access to health care, groceries, and other amenities, as well as helping people without vehicles commute to work. A Florida man was sentenced to 5 years in prison and 3 years supervised release after he was found guilty of setting his employer's truck on fire. According to WOWT, in March of 2024, Kevin Cady disconnected his truck's tracking device, so the company he worked for, Prime Inc., out of Missouri, couldn't track his whereabouts. He then parked the truck at the Omaha airport. 6 days later, surveillance showed Cady renting a vehicle from the airport, driving back to the truck and unloading items from the truck into the rental car. After he drove away, a fire started inside the truck. During the investigation, fire officials found a gas container and an incendiary device, which led them to think this was a case of arson. Cady was ordered to pay nearly $60,000 in restitution. An emergency declaration for agricultural haulers in Iowa has been extended. Since September of last year, the agricultural emergency order has been extended 6 times, including the latest extension due to concerns over a timely harvest. The declaration excludes the interstate system. Loads are not allowed to exceed a maximum of 90,000 pounds gross weight or the maximum axle weight determined by Iowa code. Drivers must comply with all posted limits on roads and bridges. $90 million has been issued for local road safety projects in the state of New York. Recently, Governor Kathy Hochul announced the available funds, which are intended to help local governments enhance road safety as part of a comprehensive safe system approach to reduce fatalities on all state roads. This funding is available through the Federal Highway Administration's Highway Safety Improvement Program and may be used to support the design and construction of countermeasures intended to reduce roadway and lane departures. Federal data shows about 40% of crash fatalities occur when a vehicle departs from its lane. Some of the suggested countermeasures include enhanced striping, curve warning signs, rumble strips, and median barriers. An aging viaduct along Interstate 70 in Topeka, Kansas is now under construction. On Friday, government officials kicked off the construction on the project. According to a local report, the $239 million state project will replace and realign the viaduct, an aging elevated 4-lane segment of I-70. A spokesperson for Kansas Department of Transportation said during the groundbreaking for the project that KDOT would focus on widening I-70 along with building the new viaduct during this year's construction season. The project is expected to wrap up in late 2027. And finally, a kitten that was stranded on a Las Vegas overpass for at least 3 weeks has been rescued. UPI reports that a group of concerned citizens and a team of electricians came together to rescue the feline. The team used a boom lift and 2 nets to ensnare the cat and bring it down safely. After a quick checkup, a veterinarian said the kitten, who has since been named Helix after the name of the electric company, was in surprisingly good health. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. For years, many truckers have struggled with a growing problem, freight fraud. Now, members of Congress are stepping up to do something about it. 2 bills, S-337 in the Senate and H.R. 880 in the House, would give FMCSA the authority and power to go after fraud. Contact your lawmakers at 202-224-3121 or at fightingfortruckers.com. Starting March 27th, Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, will be at the Mid-America Trucking Show. That takes place at the Kentucky Expo Center in Louisville. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Next, Ashley Blackford discusses a trucker's tan remedy with its creator, former truck driver Scott Catuzza. And Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department join us to discuss what's involved in an IFTA audit. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Protect your diesel engine with Howe's Diesel Defender. Restore vital lubricity, eliminate injector deposits, and boost fuel economy by 5% or more. Power performance protection, all in one. Howe's Diesel Defender, available now.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Landline Now, welcome back. We've all heard of a farmer's tan, but a trucker's tan is one that's a bit more specific. I recently spoke with Scott Katuza, who came up with a device to block out this problem.
So the trucker's tan is what you acquire while driving down the road. The left side of your body is always exposed to that nice big giant window next to you. So it doesn't usually matter what time of day, as long as it's daylight out, you're continuously being hit with that sun on the left side of your body.
Now, I'm sure, with some guys, it's probably pretty clear what they do for a living. In the dead of summer, you see one arm that's very tan and the other one that's not so much.
Absolutely. My first year driving, my left arm was so sunburned, I never thought it was ever going to go away and match my right arm again. It was so bad.
And I want to take a step back. What is your history in trucking? When did you start to notice, the trucker's tan, and when that kind of became an issue?
Almost immediately. I acquired my license for the CDLA in September of 2014. So the first few months of working, I was hauling grain from a grain elevator over by General Mills in Buffalo, New York. And it really didn't affect me because wintertime in Buffalo is obviously, you're wearing heavy coats and we got the freezing temperatures. But that following spring, I want to say within the first month of good weather and wearing T-shirts, I could tell that the left arm was significantly way darker than the right arm. And it continued to just get worse from there. I mean, week after week, day after day, you're being continuously sunburned. And it was painful to the point I was like, I got to start looking for some kind of shade. They have to make something. And I could never find anything.
Yeah, and I think that's what surprised me when I started reading your story. You mentioned you looked around, and this wasn't that long ago. I would have thought that there would have been a device or something that someone would have come up with. Were you surprised that you couldn't find anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every truck stop I would go into, I would search the entire truck part section for anything. There's a bunch of sun visor extenders to add to your the sun visor to block sun from the eyes. But I couldn't find anything that would even remotely do the job to shade the left arm.
Now, had you talked to other truck drivers to see what they were doing or if they were finding this to be an issue?
Yeah, a lot of them, a lot of the older guys claim that they're so used to it, it didn't bother them anymore. And unfortunately, looking back, I never looked at it as a kind of a health device. And I wasn't looking at the long-term damage. I was just looking for the immediate fix. Like, okay, I look ridiculous when I'm trying to go out. Anything besides doing the job itself, you're going to some kind of birthday party for your niece and nephew. And, oh, here comes Uncle Scotty with his left arm looking like a tomato. And, I just couldn't find anything that was even close to the design that I had came up with in my mind.
Now, did you find, oftentimes tan lines can kind of be a funny thing, but of course, as time went on, you realized this is a health risk. Do you find in the industry it's kind of just seen as a funny thing, or are truck drivers kind of starting to realize that this is an issue?
Long term, you do realize it's an issue. So you have to get your CDL physical bi-yearly. So when I would go in for mine, right off the top, I said, is there something that exists that can kind of prevent this? And they said, no, you should just probably start wearing sleeves because long term, you're at risk of skin cancer. And that's when I was like, wow, I really should probably think about doing everything I can to make this idea a reality.
Yeah, talk to me about the process. Obviously, sleeves would work, but I'm sure that would get hot while you're driving in some of the hotter areas especially. But you got the idea, and then what were the steps that you had to go through for the product to come to fruition?
So it was literally my first year driving, summer. Throughout the summer of 2015, I would get to the point where I would try to cross my arm. So when you're sitting in a truck, you don't have a lower armrest like you do a car. Just right to the left of you, there's a little panel that has your buttons and window. So that's the only place to keep your arm. And you can't tuck it down in between because the door, you got like maybe like this much space between the door and the seat. So I would cross my arm and drive like this, and then your arm goes numb because you're not getting blood flow to the arm, and I just really didn't know what to do at that time. You could tape paper to the window or something, but that doesn't stop the angle of the sun if it's coming down on you from kind of above. That doesn't prevent you're always being hit by that sunlight, and I guess that's when the brainstorming started, literally driving down the road, just hour after hour driving, just thinking, man, this sucks. If there was just something that could kind of come up and shade, with so curvature, so no matter where the sun is in the sky, your arm is always covered like in the shade. And really that's when it started, was just driving down the road and having hours to just kind of brainstorm the perfect device.
What was the process then, as far as coming up, like you said, you kind of had the idea of the design, but as far as making the actual product, what was the process there?
A very long, tedious process. So this wasn't something that I took into action until actually a few years later. Just financial reasons. It was very expensive to move forward with this idea. Applying for the patents alone is taking you almost 15 grand. And that's not guaranteed that you'll be approved. I could have invested that money and got a rejection letter saying, no, this isn't something that the U.S. government will issue a patent for. So that it was a risk right there, a gamble. And I was very happy when I got the letter saying that you're approved. So from there, the next process was finding a manufacturer that can. At first, I was making these in the garage, handmade, one piece at a time. And it doesn't look anything compared to what the final product. The final product is beautiful. It comes off the assembly line, injection molded. The mold closes every 45 seconds. Fully made device pops out. So, but originally I was making these, I would buy big sheets of like 8x4 panels, almost like drywall, of 1/8 thick polypropylene plastic, cutting them out, which, they're kind of a little jagged when you're sawing out each individual piece. And then you got to bend the line. It was just a long process. I mean, I made 500 by hand, which probably took almost a month to complete.
Now, the name of the product, talk to me about that, and where did that come from?
Well, it's a sun blocker. It blocks the sun. And arm rocker just came with, okay, your arm's being exposed, and almost like you're in a relaxed state. You put your arm on what would be a relaxed state to say you're trying to drive in comfort. You sit in your rocker. So I said, it's your little arm rocker. I don't know, that little panel between the glass, on the door. I just called it the rocker. That's arm rocker. Something had to rhyme with blocker. So it was really just coming up with something that sounded catchy.
What was the reaction, when you started talking to other truck drivers about this idea that you had, and, you were getting into the process of actually making it? What were the reactions?
At first, I was taking the handmade pieces to, and now that I had to wait, I didn't want to jump the gun and start exposing the product before I heard back from the patent office. So the minute I got the patent letter back saying I was approved, I took the handmade devices and I was just giving them away for free for testimonials. Said, hey, if you could reach back, use this, keep the arm from getting burned. So many truck drivers were like, what a good idea. I never would have thought, I never seen anything like it. Another guy says, this is like 20 years too late. And then he showed me his arm, and unfortunately, he had purple spots all over the arm. And that's when I was like, wow, that wasn't my intended idea at first, was this is a health device. It was really just stop the painful sunburn. But thinking about long term, I was like, yeah, man, this is really something that could prevent something that's almost unavoidable when you're doing the job.
Now, May, of course, is Melanoma and Skin Cancer Awareness Month. Do you do anything special during that month?
I offer a 25% discount on the website for individual pieces purchased. And for the last 2 years, this will be the third year, St. Christopher's Truckers Fund reached out, and it's just kind of like a little co-promotion thing. They do awareness and they help raise money for different truckers that are on hard times. If they have any kind of health issue, they help raise funds to take care of, people's expensive medical bills or help families out when truckers hit hard times. So they kind of promote the product to help just raise awareness about the dangers of long-term exposure to the sun.
Now, do you still drive truck?
No, I actually quit. I had a couple health problems that arose. So I thought it was best to give, trucking, wrap it up. I could have continued, but I just saw it was more of an uphill battle if I continued.
How does it feel, though? I mean, you're very much still part of the industry in providing a product that, is going to help a lot of truck drivers.
Yes. I mean, that's really the idea of why I wanted to do this to begin with. Was it's an everyday issue that you face. And then realizing, especially when I had my physical, and the lady had told me, you should probably start wearing sleeves because you're at risk of getting skin cancer with those kind of sunburns. And she said, you're getting that every day. You're definitely way, way at a higher risk than the average person that just commutes to work back and forth. So, yeah, I mean, I just want the product to do it as intended and help people out. And it's an easily preventable thing if you take the necessary steps. See, I'm the kind of person that I'm wearing shorts, a t-shirt, and kind of a hoodie and a light jacket in the wintertime. And being from Buffalo, 20 degrees, I'm walking around, kind of longer shorts, t-shirt, and a hoodie. People are looking at me like I'm just a warm-bodied person. So in the summer, the last thing I could do is wear long sleeves. I'd pass out of heat exhaustion. So.
That was Scott Katuza talking about the Arm Rocker Sun Blocker. For more information, you can visit truckerstan.com. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when your truck on a cat scale.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. I'm sure that for some people who went into trucking, as they learned everything they needed to know to operate, they must have thought, no one said there would be math involved. But in fact, there's quite a bit depending on what kind of role you fill in the industry. For those who are on their own authority, especially, but even for some truckers who are leased onto a carrier, IFTA reporting is definitely something that involves some math, and if you don't do it right, you might have a rough time if you run into an audit. Here to explain and to offer some advice are Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks as always, Mark. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here because I've talked about this a lot over the years, but I still think that it's really hard for people to quite catch what IFTA is. So why don't we kind of start with the definition of what is IFTA?
Well, I mean, IFTA is basically it takes your fuel tax money, which is collected at different rates for different states, and it spreads it across the states that you operate in. Let's say, and I use Kansas and Missouri as an easy example because Kansas is about 10 cents higher fuel tax than Missouri. So if I fill up in Missouri and run across the state line and drive all my fuel out in Kansas, then based on my miles per gallon, I will owe Kansas approximately 10 cents for every gallon that I burn in Kansas. So bought in Missouri, burn it in Kansas, owe Kansas the money. And consequently, if you turn that around and you buy your fuel in a higher price state and then you drive through a lower tax state, you will have a refund. So as what I recommend to folks is, if at all possible, buy your fuel where you run at. Buy some fuel, if you run in some higher states, if you're in Illinois, which is one of the higher price states, you'll probably do good to buy a little fuel while you're there to offset that IFTA. Now, that said, that is what IFTA's point is to take that money and distribute it to the states that are supposed to get it based on the fuel that you burn in their state. So that, but then it comes down to an audit. When you come up to an audit, well,
Yeah. I actually knew a trucker who, when he was mapping out his route, he would always figure out the first truck stop he could hit in a state when he entered it. And he would go ahead and buy fuel right there. And it made it a lot easier for him to kind of, keep track of that. But there are some state lines where there's no truck stop.
That is true, and it is difficult. If you're running, especially you get into the New England states and stuff where you run through multiple states in just a few hours. You can't really do that. So ideally, you will even out on your IFTA, no refund, no, you don't have to pay. But that's ideally. It doesn't always work like that. And just the basis of trucking, so much of it is hard to schedule and hard to figure exactly where you're going to be. That's where IFTA comes into play. I mean, you can recall once upon a time, folks would have, 10, 12, 14 different stickers on their truck for different states and have to deal with all this, kind of a bingo card of regulations for fuel taxes and other reasons. So, the IFTA does simplify that.
Okay. Now, one of the first things I'm sure some people are thinking right now is, can't I get someone to do this for me? Are there services that offer to calculate all the IFTA for you? And bluntly, are they worth what they cost?
In fact, there are multiple places that will help you with that. They probably are worth what they cost, I would imagine. These audits are no joke. I mean, they're worse than a new entrant audit or an IRS audit, in my opinion. I mean, and the fines that you could be facing are just tremendous. ELDs help some of that nowadays, but I haven't met an ELD that will do all of the IFTA for you, so I wouldn't rely on that. You still need to be doing your own in some capacity, whether that's getting with an accountant or doing it on your own because you've been doing it for so many years. But it definitely is worth the money to invest in it. And keep in mind, you got to keep this paperwork for years on end. What is it?
Yep.
4
years for IFTA audit.
They go back 4 years, but I think you should keep it for longer.
Yeah, most generally when you have an audit, the auditor will contact you and say, hey, I want to see paperwork from this certain section or this quarter, because IFTA is quarterly, 4 quarters, it's filed 4 times a year. So they'll want to see it from this certain section or this certain time frame. And that usually has to do with the fact that there's an anomaly there. You've messed up the number. Whoever does it for you messed up the number. And so, they come back and you're going to have to go back and reprove that. And 2 years back, well, you need to have that paperwork.
fuel receipts, things like that for supporting documentation. Not everybody keeps that stuff, unfortunately.
Aaron, you mentioned people that try and use the ELD to track this. And I remember talking with you guys once before, and Tom, I think it was you who mentioned that you, as you said, Aaron, you've got to be careful about this, but most ELDs have a different way of tracking their location than what IFTA is willing to accept. Can you explain?
The ELD meets up with, for the most part, the federal requirements for the hours of service, which it doesn't require as tight of tracking. If you're, especially if you're on personal conveyance, then it even gets looser then, if you're off duty. But for IFTA, they require a ping every 15 minutes and location information be logged every 15 minutes. Some of the ELDs, when they first came out, did not do that. Now, they would say, hey, we'll do your IFTA. We'll help you with your IFTA. And then they didn't provide the correct information. And there are still some of the major ELD providers that still do not quite have it together as far as meeting the IFTA requirements. So there are those. And let me say, with IFTA, those folks, they prefer to see paperwork. I couldn't tell you for how many years, every time I crossed the state line, I would have to write down my miles and write down the major routes that I was on through that state. That is what IFTA prefers to see. Now, if you're using an ELD to provide your IFTA documentation or to figure your IFTA, and then you just go off of those miles that it gives you and you upload it into the IFTA system, that's well and great. But keep that paper documentation. Keep the fuel receipts. Keep that stuff, because during an IFTA audit, the first thing they do is come in and they want to disallow everything that you've submitted. So you have to resubmit and re-verify and reprove it. And if you don't have the documentation, the paperwork, the receipts, the toll everything to show where you were at and what you were doing and how much fuel you burned and how many miles you ran, they'll disallow that, and they've got a default that they fall back on that is not pretty at all.
I want to talk about that a little bit, because what you're describing too sounds like a lot of what IRS auditors do, which is it's their job to come in and disallow deductions you've taken. Their job is to get you to pay every bit of tax that you can and that they think you owe. And I put it that way very carefully. But Aaron, you did say that IFTA audits can be worse. Kind of going off what Tom said there, what is it beyond that makes it worse? Is it just how tough they are or how much they disallow, or give us an idea?
Because it's based off of purely the numbers, right? That's what goes. And so many of these ELDs, like Tom was saying, the way they ping and things like that, they could be off miles. Every mile you're off, that's a potential dollar amount, right? That's a fine right there. So going back to the second quarter of 2022, okay, do you have all that paperwork? Do you have those fuel receipts for that quarter? Guys just don't have that paperwork. They have some of their driver qualification files and things like that, and then that audit happens and they stop doing their paperwork. They get a little lackadaisical out there, and you don't think that you're actually going to get an IFTA audit. In my opinion, an IFTA audit is worse than the IRS audit. We get so many calls about guys going through these audits and they've gotten fines, or they don't have the right paperwork, things like that. It's just a hell of a deal.
Yeah, and if you don't have what it takes, then IFTA has a default that they fall back on, and they will drop you to 4 miles per gallon and charge you the difference for every mile that you ran. So if you're normally pushing, today's trucks can push 7 and 8 miles per gallon. But if you don't have all the documentation and they come in, they want to do an audit, which, I think part of what makes this more difficult than an IRS audit is because at least most folks take their paperwork for the IRS to somebody to do it, and they staple it all together and they add all the numbers. So you kind of got that stuff in one location. For your IFTA, it's up to you to keep most of that documentation, and that's where it gets lost. And if you don't have it and you can't reprove it, they can easily come through and drop you to 4 miles per gallon. And if you were claiming 8, now you owe double what you thought you owed.
And most people, like Tom was alluding to, have a tax guy, right, in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Most people don't have an IFTA guy.
Which may be another reason those services can be helpful.
They can be. Now let me say, IFTA is not. It's not difficult as long as you do what needs to be done. You keep track of your miles when you go across state lines. You keep track of the fuel you purchase in each state, and you save those receipts. IFTA is really not difficult to do, and I tell people, you can pay somebody to do a lot of different parts of your job. You can pay somebody to do your back office stuff. You can pay a dispatcher. You can pay a broker. You can pay a lot of people to pay. But for the smart owner operator or small business, you're trying to keep all those people out of your pocket, and so understanding IFTA and doing it yourself is not difficult. There are people that definitely want to outsource everything, and then there are some other folks that truly know, hey, these dollars are hard to come by. Let me keep as many in my pocket as I can. And IFTA is not difficult as long as you do what you're supposed to do and keep the documentation, report on a quarterly basis, enter your information, because all the states have this upload portal where you can go there to upload your IFTA information, your miles, and so it's not difficult, but you have to be vigilant and do it and follow through.
And it gets easier every quarter, right? Once you've been doing it, the repetition, things of that nature, like Tom was saying, keep these people out of your pockets. I mean, I understand why they're there and what the service provides, but, if you go around paying everybody, you're not going to be in business very long. You're not the person that we're going to talk to in 30 years still trucking.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to something that we've talked about that you all have said many, many times before. Once you are out there on your own, if you are an owner-operator, especially if you're on your own authority, you're not a truck driver only. You're a business owner.
You are a business person, and you must conduct yourself like that. And for a driver who works, drives 11 out of 14, and then they have 10 hours off. As an owner, you don't have that 10 hours off. There's other stuff that needs to be done, much more that needs to be handled. So, if you're a business owner, you've got to conduct yourself as such.
Yeah, and I think this is too why you see some people that in family situations where kind of the business end is sometimes run by the spouse at home. And I don't think that's as true anymore as it was back in the day.
It happens, and that is a good setup for some, but not everybody has a spouse at home. Not everybody has that partner, to take care of that paperwork and to get this stuff filed, and they have to do it. A lot of it gets done from the truck. And with the with the internet and the fact that you've got a phone with computing powers there, a lot of it gets done from the truck.
Yeah, I would be curious, and we're running out of time here, unfortunately, but we've talked about the fact people try and use their ELDs. I am really surprised that someone hasn't come up with some type of computer program, even phone-based, that just does all this calculation for you. And it seems to me that that's a very doable thing.
Yeah, I believe it is. And I think there are some apps out there that do this, but you just, like we were talking about at the beginning, you got to make sure that they meet the requirements for what IFTA wants. Because if they don't and they disallow everything, man, that's going to be a big chunk. You're going to pay some money.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, guys, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for the information.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
I've been talking with Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Landline Now will be back in a moment.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit capitalreman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. The first Trump administration was well known for rolling back regulations. This time around, it looks like Congress wants to get in on the act with at least two pieces of legislation targeting regulations that affect the trucking industry. Here to explain is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
Mark, I'm good. How are you?
Very well, very well. Now, let's kind of take these one at a time. First up is a bill in the Senate, S-996, and the name is the Preserving Choice in Vehicle Purchases Act. Why don't we start with what the bill basically would do if it were passed?
Yes, so this is a bill that's been introduced by Senator Markwayne Mullin, a Republican from Oklahoma, that would limit the EPA from issuing waivers to states that would go further on emissions restrictions or things like that. So in other words, it would limit, for example, California from going far further and basically mandating EV trucks and essentially outlawing the sale of internal combustion engines or your traditional diesel trucks. So the bill that Senator Mullin has introduced is, again, I'll reiterate, has to do with the waivers that EPA can issue to states when they want to implement more stringent standards than what's in place at the federal level.
Well, and you say, for example, California, but let's face it, this is about California, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about California, but also a couple states that follow California and follow California's lead on these emissions issues. So yes, it is California, but there are trickle-down effects to this as well.
There is a waiver out, and I guess there was a regulation there in California. I don't know if it's still in effect or not because things are very much in flux right now. But what is the situation regarding these regulations in California right now?
Yeah, you're right that it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on. We know that the EPA last week announced a flurry of deregulatory action. We know that they rolled back the EPA's rule on the greenhouse gas phase 3 for heavy duty trucks and the NOx emission standards for heavy duty trucks. I have to double check exactly where the California mandate or the California waiver is right now, but we know that they are certainly charging headfirst into rolling a lot of these things back.
Okay. What is OOIDA's position on this bill? Because obviously this affects a lot of people in the trucking industry, and emission regulations have kind of been the bane of many a trucker's existence. Where does the association stand on this?
Yeah, on this specific bill, we are fully in favor because we recognize that it should be up to Congress and through Congress, as they've established it, the EPA to set nationwide standards for emissions. It's not really feasible, especially when you're dealing with such a large industry as trucking and such an important component of it as truck manufacturing, to have a patchwork of regulations. And that's especially true for small business truckers. Obviously, if you're a one truck operation, you don't have the capital to invest in things like EV trucks or necessarily invest in alternative fuels. You're dependent on the infrastructure to be in place to operate those vehicles. So when California goes ahead and tries to subvert what Congress and the federal government are doing, it really just makes it very difficult to comply, makes it very expensive to comply. And for small operators, again, it's just something that's really not feasible.
While this is going on, another member of Congress, this time in the House, has a similar bill with a similar goal, but there's a little bit of a difference in approach. Walk us through that bill, if you would please, Bryce. What is the bill? What would it do?
Yeah, it's basically, it's very similar to Senator Mullin's bill, except that it would preempt the EPA from finalizing or moving forward with any sort of regulations that would limit the availability of traditional combustion engines, or would mandate the use of any specific technology. So mandating the use of things like electric vehicles or electric trucks. So you can kind of think of it as Senator Mullins' bill would deal with the waivers and state issues, and this bill from Senator Wahlberg, a Republican from Michigan, would address the EPA and prevent them from setting national standards that would limit vehicle availability.
Now, this bill, when the congressman introduced it in the last Congress, had the word automobile in the name. And to clarify, you said earlier trucks, so this does affect trucks as well as cars.
Correct. Yes, that was a little bit of a misnomer, I guess you could say, with the bill title. But as it is written, it would, cover all sorts of vehicles.
Okay. Who introduced this one there in the House, and why is it that they did that?
So, it's Representative Wahlberg from Michigan. And as you can imagine, Michigan's a pretty important state for automotive manufacturing. So there's a real interest there in making sure that the government isn't setting unworkable mandates that just don't work for private industry and for manufacturers, forcing them to kind of chase down these technologies and ultimately try and sell these vehicles to customers when they don't want them and when customers realize that it won't work for them.
So if these two bills were to pass, and if everything EPA is doing in terms of deregulatory actions were to actually go through fully, do we know at this point where that would leave us? Because we've been dealing with new emission regulations going all the way back to October of 2002. So do we know at what stage we would be, or is this just everything at this point?
So I think it would take some time to untangle, but if all of these actions between and let me also kind of qualify that by saying we know there will be the inevitable lawsuits when EPA is trying to roll back some of these rules. But ultimately, if all of these were to be successfully passed and implemented, it seems like we would be at least back to before a few years ago when the Biden administration issued some of these new rules. Again, the greenhouse gas rules and the heavy-duty NOx standards. It would seem that we would likely revert back to the standards that were previously in place. And on the EPA side of things, I think we would see a much, I can't think of the word off the top of my head exactly, but a much less active EPA on these issues. So it would take some time to sort out, but certainly it would hopefully provide some clarity. I know it drives me crazy sometimes trying to sort out who's doing what on what level of government and kind of what specific vehicle standard you're talking about. So hopefully this would slow things down, bring some clarity, and allow the market to kind of take care of things and implement new standards and new technologies as they become feasible for ultimately truckers.
Now, I mentioned earlier the Senate bill is S996. Do we have a number on the House bill at this point?
I do not have it yet, no. I know that it was kind of a late-breaking thing on Friday for Congressman Wahlberg's office, so I know that they're reintroducing it or had reintroduced it Friday or were in the process of doing so. We don't have that yet. But this bill actually passed the House last year. So there is precedent for this legislation. We know it's something that the House has been supportive of. So we'll be watching closely to see what happens with it again this year.
Okay. That said, I know this is kind of a loaded question, but we have all this action going on. Do we think that this is it, or do we think we're going to see more action in terms of environmental regulations that affect trucks?
To me, at least, it feels like this kind of throws everything out there, kind of sets the table to take care of so much of what we've been tracking. I think the next steps that we'll be watching now is ultimately how does this move forward? How are these bills, how do they try and move these bills forward? And how does the EPA manage the actual rollback of these rules? It's not quite so simple as just saying it's undone. There's processes they have to follow. So we'll be tracking that and see what kind of challenges there are to those efforts.
Okay. Well, Bryce, that's all the time we have, but thank you very much for the information.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with Bryce Munchin of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, don't forget, you need to be in touch with your members of Congress about these measures. There's a lot going on right now. We need to make sure their attention is focused on some of these trucking issues. And the number to do that is 202-224-3121. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.